Welcome to Edison Library North. My name is Dr. Michael Rothman, and tonight we're going to be talking about hormonal balance and hormonal imbalances. So let me just introduce myself a little bit more so you know where this information is coming from. I'm a medical doctor. I'm board certified in both internal medicine and emergency medicine. The focus of my practice at this point is helping people restore their health through balancing their lifestyle, their diets, and using some more sophisticated methods to help them achieve this process. I have a clinic. It's in Red Bank, New Jersey, and it's called MD Wellness. And MD has stands for many different things. One of those things is metabolically directed, meaning that the focus of the treatment is on the whole patient and their whole metabolism, as opposed to treating their symptoms with very specific either drugs or other agents. So I'm going to just jump right into the talk. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you and I'll be happy to answer questions. I would think that there's some stuff here tonight that I'm going to talk about that you haven't heard before. I certainly hope so, because if you heard it all before, there's no reason to be here right now. And I may give you some information tonight that may upset you. You may differ with it. You may not think that this is correct. Let me just tell you that I'm not giving you any opinions in general tonight. I'm really going by, as far as I know, to be the best scientific evidence that I'm aware of. Critics may say, well, this has never been proven, but we have to understand that there's science, there's hard science, which is based on the search for knowledge, and then there's medical science. And oftentimes medical science, it's not necessarily a search for knowledge, but a search for ways of using medical technology to create a profit. So there's a big disconnect between real hard science and medical science, and that's unfortunate. You'd think they'd have the same goals, but they're not. So the information I'm going to give to you tonight is based on hard science, meaning biology, biochemistry, physics. These are the true sciences. Okay, so with that as an introduction, let's talk about hormones. We've all heard of hormones, and hormones are very, very powerful agents. They have such a profound effect. We've all heard of people using steroids, for example, as performance-enhancing drugs, right, in baseball and football. Why do people use these things? Because they work. You can transform a patient's body completely with hormones, and even a small amount can have a huge difference. So we have hormones in our body to help us handle this environment that we live in. We live in a sort of a hostile environment that's always changing. It gets hot, it gets cold, we have to do things, we have to perform functions. Our bodies have to metabolize food. We have to maintain our blood sugar. We have all these processes that we have to do. We have to rebuild and repair things. And so the hormones help to maintain our body's balance. And sometimes they can get out of balance. So I've written here, so they're secreted in response to internal and external stimulation. So for example, if you eat a big sandwich and your blood sugar goes up, you will secrete a hormone called insulin to lower your blood sugar. If you're scared, you may put out a hormone called adrenaline to help you manifest that fight or flight response and get your heartbeat going. If there's inflammation in your body, your adrenal glands could put out cortisol to help combat that inflammation. If you're of childbearing age and you're a female, you may have higher levels of progesterone at certain points in your cycle. If you're a man, you may have high levels of testosterone in your body to attract you to a female so that you could procreate and make new life. So all these hormones are secreted in a response to something. And if it's a good something, then your hormones will be balanced. And if it's too many bad things and too much stress, the hormones can become imbalances. So, which leads me to the next slide, which is hormonal imbalances. What causes these hormonal imbalances? And it's a consequence of stress. whatever that stress may be. And so after a while, your body cannot handle this stress, and the hormones start to become distorted. So the next 3 slides are a series of what are called GASS, the General Adaptation Stress Syndrome. This was coined by Hans Selle, who was a physiologist and created this notion of stress and how it affects the organism. So initially, in this so-called phase 1 or stage 1 of general adaptation stress syndrome, it's almost like there's an alarm going off. So let's say things are going well and you feel pretty well. You're getting plenty of rest. You're eating well. Things are happy in your house. But now all of a sudden, something happens. There's bills that need to be paid, or someone's sick in the family, or you have a leak in your roof, or whatever it is. There's some stress enters your life, and it becomes something that's there a lot. This is the beginning of stress, of the general adaptation stress syndrome, and would be considered the alarm phase. And so initially what would happen is that your cortisol levels, this stress hormone, will go up, and you can see the arrows are thickened to this pathway towards cortisol. So this cortisol will start to rise because you've been under stress. If you look at this diagram carefully, you can see where does this cortisol come from in the first place, and the top of the food chain when it comes to your stress hormones and your sex hormones is something called cholesterol. Now, a lot of people know of cholesterol as some poisonous thing that we should avoid at all costs. And I hope by the end of this talk you're going to think differently about cholesterol, because it's not poisonous at all. The notion that cholesterol is poisonous was made up by the food companies to sell margarine about 50 or 60 years ago. And they haven't stopped. And the medical science has also tried to demonize cholesterol because I guess it's good for business. Let me just segue off and talk about cholesterol for a moment. Now, I see we have some people here, perhaps from India. You're from India? You born there? In India, there's a health food. It's called ghee. Are you familiar with ghee? Okay, what is ghee? It's butter. It's clarified. In other words, it's really concentrated butter, right? So ghee is concentrated butter. And in India, ghee has been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and it's considered a health food there, right? Yet, a lot of people from India come to this country, and they'll stop using ghee. And oftentimes, as soon as that happens, they start to get really sick. Now, why do they stop using it? Because they've been told, oh my God, there's butter in there, and there's cholesterol in there, and this is really bad for you, and so you better not consume it. Do you use ghee? Huh? Not much. When you lived in India, did you use ghee?
Yeah.
More. Okay. How about you?
See, ghee is not saturated. Butter is saturated. There's a difference between ghee and butter.
And what is the difference in
Especially
that?
the cow's ghee. The cow's butter,
Uh-huh.
that ghee is not saturated. Unless you keep it in the fridge, it won't solidify. It will be crystal clear.
Okay, well, being solid and being saturated are
So
not necessarily the same
that's what they
thing.
say. They don't eat butter, but you can eat ghee.
Okay. My understanding is that ghee is actually the butter with all the carbohydrates, all the sugars taken out. It's actually pure cholesterol and saturated fat. So it's actually concentrated. But so you guys, do you use ghee?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
In some of the things.
In some things, okay. So the point I'm trying to make is that this cholesterol that we've been told is bad for us actually is really, really important. In fact, it's so important that your liver, if you don't eat it, will really work very, very hard to make it. And you'll pretty much make as much as you possibly need. Now, sometimes you can't make as much as you need, but if your cholesterol is really high, it means that your body needs it for a certain reason. It either needs it because it's under stress, or it needs it to protect the cell membranes, and there's a lot of other functions that cholesterol has. So now you've been under stress for a while, and now we've reached phase 2, which is Selle called the resistance phase. So here in the diagram, you can see that the lines going towards cortisol are even thicker. and the lines going to the sex hormones have dropped. And finally, in the last phase, the sex hormones will actually go down to very low levels. So when I see a patient in my clinic, I want to know where they are in this spectrum of stress. If I check their levels of cortisol and DHEA and testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, and they're all low, I know this patient has reached the exhaustion phase, and this is a patient who really needs to have some sort of hormone replacement at that point because they can't make it anymore. Now, obviously, I want to feed their adrenal glands with some good stuff at the very top there, cholesterol, but I may want to feed them some other stuff. Yet, if I see someone in this stage, well, here their cortisol level is really high. They may not need hormones at this point. What they need to do is change that distortion, reduce the stress. All three of these stages need to reduce the stress, of course. But if you give a person that has high cortisol levels other hormones, they may feel really lousy. They may say, oh, the hormone replacement therapy didn't work. Well, it didn't work because they didn't need to have anything replaced. They just need to have their hormones rebalanced. So there are a lot of doctors out there. I don't know how many. I haven't counted. But they specialize in hormone replacement therapy. And you go in there, they check your sex hormones, and they say, oh, look, your testosterone's low, your progesterone's low, your estrogen's low. Here, I'm going to give you these hormones to replace them. This is a very simplistic way of looking at this because I always ask the question, why? Why are they low, and why isn't the body not making them? Let's fix what's wrong. So it's very important to look at the whole big picture. So if someone asks me, do I specialize in hormone replacement therapy, the answer is absolutely not. I specialize in wellness, and sometimes hormone replacement is useful for that, but I don't want to start with that. That's maybe 3 or 4 steps down the road. So if stress is causing all of these things, we want to look at the different types of stressors out there, and you want to minimize these things. And it can really, really mess you up. I'm sure everybody in this room has probably had an experience where they've had a bad stretch of time where it was weeks or months of very stressful stuff going on, and all of a sudden, something happened. They felt lousy. They couldn't sleep. They started gaining weight. Their hair was falling out. They developed aches and pains, maybe constipation or diarrhea. I mean, I don't know, but after a while, that stress got to you, and you started to have symptoms from the stress. Can everybody share that experience? Say, yeah, that's sort of happened? I can tell you it's happened to me many, many times. And so as I get older, as we get more experience, we can sort of start to see, okay, here's some stress. I can see it coming down the road here, and I want to try to do something about it before it even gets to me. You know, they say that's what experience is. It's learning to recognize a mistake before you make it again. And sometimes you have to make that mistake many times. And sometimes you can make a mistake and not realize it's a mistake. That's the worst kind of mistake, because then you don't learn from it. So you want to learn from your mistakes. These things happen. We're all human, and we make mistakes all the time. But if you don't learn from them, you are destined to repeat them. And sometimes it snowballs out of control. So what are the effects of stress on hormone levels? Excessive stress will alter your hormone levels, and in general, the cortisol will rise, and the sex hormones will drop. So what causes this stress? You know, a lot of people, if you ask them, how do you define stress? They'll say, well, I had a bad day, or someone gave me the finger on the New Jersey Turnpike. Okay, these things could be stressful. But basically, I would define stress as anything. Any thought, any food, any situation, an environmental influence, whether it's heavy metals or mold, anything that's coming into your internal or external environment that is not good for you in excess that's the way I would define stress. So if you're staying up too late, waking up too early, if you work graveyard shifts, if you're eating poorly, if you're working too much and not resting enough, these things all cause stresses, and eventually these stressors will eventually affect your hormone levels. So any imbalance that you have in your life, so to speak, can cause stress. Anybody have any questions at this point? Yes, ma'am.
Too little cholesterol?
Too little cholesterol? Is that a stress?
Is that a body stressor?
If you're talking about dietarily, if you don't eat enough cholesterol?
No, I'm talking about when you go to a cardiologist and they insist that you take statins. to lower your cholesterol.
Okay.
Because your ratio is a little...
Okay, the question
I'm
is,
talking about myself.
the question is low serum cholesterol related to taking a medication a stress? Absolutely. It's a very bad stress because your cholesterol has to be at a certain level to protect your cells from damage in your tissues. And yet you're taking a drug to lower it. I saw a patient in the ER on Sunday, and the guy had a zillion complaints. I think he was about 50 years old. He just had so many complaints, and he was on all sorts of drugs. And just sort of for fun, for my own entertainment, I ordered a lipid panel on the guy because I want to know how low is this guy's cholesterol, because I figured it must be really low. His total cholesterol came back at 88. Now, if you look at the lab result, at the test, and they have a normal range, the so-called normal range for cholesterol is 0 to 200 now. So that means if it came back at 88, that's fine. That's normal. Really? Now, that's what the medical science says about it. What is the real science? What does the scientific literature say about cholesterol? If you're under 160, you start to really increase your chances of dying of every single disease, including heart attacks, strokes, cancer, all sorts of stuff. Then they try to explain it away, and they say, well, these people that have low cholesterol, they just happen to be sick. And their sickness is causing the low cholesterol. Really? Is the chicken is doing this to the egg or what? So yes, this is very stressful, and I don't know what your cholesterol is, ma'am, but if it's too low, that's not good for you.
I know that. How do you argue with the cardiologist?
How do you argue with the cardiologist? You can't argue with a specialist because they know everything. I've had plenty of discussions with specialists because I'm just a ER doctor and an internist. I have no right arguing with someone who's a specialist. So I know my place, and I don't bother arguing with them because there's no reason to, because I'm not going to win that argument. But, I can tell you that when I see patients in my practice and their cholesterol is too high or too low, whatever it may be, my goal is to get them to be balanced and to normalize these levels. And it's pretty hard to be healthy if your total cholesterol level is too low. It's a really vital substance in your body. And that's why we have all these side effects from these drugs that lower your cholesterol. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to keep moving on then. So I want to talk about this balancing act here that we call life. And I've used an illustration here called the Goldilocks principle. And we all heard the story of Goldilocks, how the soup was either too hot or too cold, or the bed was too hard or too soft. And basically, you want, or the soup was hot or cold, you want your soup, your internal soup. It has to be just right. If your soup is not right, your metaphorical soup, you will experience symptoms. So if your soup doesn't have enough cholesterol in it, you will experience symptoms. If your soup has too many hormones or not enough hormones, if your cortisol is too high, if any imbalance in your internal body chemistry is out of balance, you will experience symptoms eventually, and it may even manifest as a disease which someone can name and treat.
Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
If the 200 is only the medical cutoff, what about the science? How high can it go with science's opinion?
Okay, that's a great question. So the question is, what is really a optimal level for cholesterol? What does the scientific information say about this? Let me answer that this way. When I first started my training in 1982, I was a first-year medical student at the University of Miami. A normal cholesterol was 240 at that time. And then I remember somewhere along the line that they lowered it to 220. Then they lowered it to 200. And now they are saying, well, your LDL, the bad cholesterol, should be less than 100. And if you have heart disease or diabetes, we want to keep it at 70. So I'd say the answer to your question is, probably between 180 and 220 or so is probably really optimal. But just because it's 240 doesn't mean that that's something you should start taking medicines for. Medicines should, really be used as a last resort, not a first resort. And then the question is, who are they? They are people, most of the scientific, I should say the medical scientific studies are being done by people that actually have ties to the pharmaceutical industry. So these are not unbiased studies. These things, unfortunately, are very biased. There was a study that came out very recently. You probably heard about this, the Mediterranean diet study. This is all over the news. You guys hear about this in the news? And I hear people sprouting conclusions. The conclusions of this study are that, oh, we should all be taking olive oil and eating lots of nuts and eating lots of fruits and vegetables and keeping our saturated fats down. Well, this is an amazing conclusion because the study actually compared Mediterranean diets to low-fat diets, and they found out that low-fat diets were terrible. So if low-fat diets are terrible, how can we conclude that we should avoid fat in our diet? This is exactly the opposite of the conclusion they should have drawn, and yet it's not possible to have it both ways. So they got to be kidding. Are they really trying to fool us that bad? So I actually looked at the authors of this paper. Every single one of the authors had one of the following ties or more. They work for a drug company. They work for a nut company. They work for a dried fruit company. They work for an alcoholic beverage company. I think that was it. I think we've covered it all. So every single one of these people had a reason why they wanted to actually work for this study. Am I saying the Mediterranean diet is bad? No. Am I saying it's wonderful? No. Actually, the best diet is actually something that incorporates saturated fats in your diet at every meal. They did not test this particular theory because they didn't test it. They only compared low-fat diets to Mediterranean-style diets. But their conclusions are totally off base. Okay, so the Goldilocks principle. You want to have everything balanced. You want to make sure that you're staying at the sort of at the peak of this U-shaped curve here so that this is where optimal health is, when everything is in balance. So for nutrients, when it comes to whether it's water or potassium or magnesium or any nutrient, too much of anything is no good and too little of anything is no good. This is what I would call a classic example of the Goldilocks principle. Let me just give you a few examples. If you don't drink enough water, clearly you're going to get dehydrated. This is really bad for you. It'll hurt your kidneys. Your sodium level will go up. It'll end up causing an acidosis in your body, all sorts of manifestations, and you'll get sick eventually if you don't drink enough water, and eventually you'll actually die. On the other hand, if you drink too much water, well, now your sodium will go down. It'll raise your aldosterone level. It'll actually completely change your metabolism. It could actually make you go insane. This is called water intoxication, psychotic water intoxication, and eventually you will die from a seizure if you drink too much water. So even just something like water, too little or too much is no good. So if anyone ever tells you, oh, you can't have too much water, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so for anything, too much or too little is not a good thing. Now, the definition of what too much is and too little is, that's where, there's a fine point there. But you want to be balanced. When it comes to poisons, there's no such thing as too little poisons in your body, okay? A lot of times people ask me, they say, Doc, what's better, sugar or aspartame as a sweetener? And my answer is, well, neither one's better. They're both poisons. And the less you put in your body, the better off you are. Now, one may be less bad than the other, but that doesn't make it better, okay? So how would I answer that question? They're both really poisonous in different ways, and I wouldn't recommend either. If you do want to use a sweetener, I would recommend something like stevia, okay? Or if you insist on an artificial sweetener, the one that's least toxic, that's less bad, it's not good for you, but it's less bad, would be good old saccharin, also known as Sweet and Low, the one in the pink package, that they've been telling us don't use that one because it's poisonous. Whatever, here's sort of a guiding factor here when it comes to nutrition. Whatever you hear on the news, if you do exactly the opposite of what they tell you to do, you're probably in good shape. Now, I know that sounds really crazy, but unfortunately, it's true. Okay, so there's no optimal amount of a poison. And when I'm going to talk about some of the metabolic poisons that people are consuming, probably everybody in this room is consuming these things on a daily basis, including myself, because it's almost impossible to avoid these poisons. But the thing is, first of all, you have to recognize, I talked about before, about if you see a mistake coming or making an error, you don't want to keep making that mistake. So at least if you know what to avoid, at least you can start to avoid these things, and you'll have a chance of being healthy. So poisons to avoid, I have a list here. You guys have all these things. Sugar is one of the biggest, most ubiquitous poisons out there, and unfortunately, people are consuming this all the time. They're addicted to it, you want to get this out of your life as much as you can. If you're eating sugar, sweet things, craving sweets, you want something sweet in your mouth, you're not really hungry, but you want to snack on something, it means you're addicted to sweet stuff. And you got to just recognize that you are addicted and that you should try to deal with it if you want to be healthy. I can tell you that I am not addicted to sugar. I gave up sugar completely, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, and I have it just a few times a year, like on a special occasion.
Do
But
you
that's
use
about
a
it.
sugar substitute?
Do I personally use?
Sweet and low instead of the sugar?
I don't use any sugar, sir. I don't use sweet and low. No, not at all.
So in a cup of coffee, you just add milk?
I don't drink coffee.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
So, sugar, really bad. You like sugar, sir? You use sugar?
No, I use the sweet and low.
Sweet and low? Okay, well, that's the least bad one. That's a good choice then, relatively. Fried foods are poisonous. Okay, stay away from these things. You've probably heard, oh, fried foods are bad. You have no idea how bad they really are. And the more I learn about these things, the more I realize, oh my God, this stuff is so poisonous. You want to stay away from vegetable oils, things like corn oil, soy oil, canola oil, sunflower, safflower, all of these things. The only oils you want to use would be good old butter or ghee, coconut oil, and olive oil. Other poisons, things that are being used to produce these commercially manufactured foods, like insecticides and pesticides. These tend to have estrogenic properties. And this will really affect your hormone levels as well. The reason I'm talking about all these poisons is because all these poisons will cause stress. And that stress will eventually distort your hormones and mess things up. Why is soy on that list? Because soy has estrogenic properties, number one. They say it's good because it has estrogenic properties, right? Whatever they say to do, if you do the exact opposite, you're probably in good shape. Estrogen is really not a very good hormone to have in excess. There's other reasons why you want to avoid soy. Soy will just destroy your thyroid function, okay? And if your thyroid is out, it'll mess up your liver, it'll raise your cholesterol, all of these other manifestations occur. This is very stressful on the body. Now, we've been lied to and told, oh, soy is a staple in the Orient. People eat soy all the time, blah, 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 blah. No, they don't. The only people that really consume large amounts of soy are people that have been duped into thinking that it's good for them. In the Orient, they use soy as a condiment, like soy sauce. Okay? Now, we don't eat, that's like saying that, well, I eat ketchup and I eat mustard. No, we don't. We use them as condiments. So this notion that soy is used as a main staple is nonsense. In fact, the ancient monks, they needed to be celibate as part of their lifestyles. They would consume soy purposefully to reduce their libido because the estrogenic properties would basically whack out their testosterone and they wouldn't desire women at that point, and it was easier for them to be celibate, which tells you how good soy is for your hormones. Food additives, things like nitrates, nitrites, MSG, which stands for monosodium glutamate, aspartame, food colorings. I should have Splenda on here as well. These things, all of these things that they do to color the food and make it taste like real food, to process the food, all of these things are poisonous and cause stress to your body and will, make you go through these stages that I talked about here of the general adaptation stress syndrome. So it's not easy to be healthy when you're living in a toxic environment. And that's why we're seeing an epidemic of so many diseases all at the same time. I mean, name a disease out there that's not on the rise, whether it's cancer or high blood pressure or diabetes or heart disease or autism or epilepsy, asthma, name a disease that's not on the rise right now. They're all on the rise, despite all these heroic measures and trillions of dollars being spent. So, leads us to, what should I do? How can I be healthy? Well, you want to eat a healthy diet. This is absolutely important. And I have printed out for you what I would consider to be a good, healthy, wholesome diet. We'll talk about that in more detail. You want to get plenty of sunlight during the day. It's really important. And you may think, how did I just segue from food to sunlight? because light is actually a very important nutrient. Now, I know in the mainstream they're telling you, avoid the sun, it's bad for you, right? But if you go back to that general premise, whatever they tell you to do, if you do the exact opposite, you're probably in good shape. Sunlight is vitally important to your health. It's way more than vitamin D. It helps reset your brain function, your hypothalamic function, your hormones. Lack of sunlight can cause and contribute to distortions in your hormone levels, can drop your sex hormone levels, can raise your cortisol, can cause all sorts of imbalances. And unfortunately, we live under these garbage light all the time, these fluorescent lights and these monochromatic lights. This is junk light. Just like there's junk food, this is junk light. And when your eyeballs and your brain is exposed to this on a consistent basis, it actually causes a distortion. And it can affect your immune system and your hormone system and your autonomic nervous system. So sunlight is really, really vitally important. And if you notice, I write here, during the day, of course. Now, it's hard to get real sunlight at night, but you want to have light during the day, and you want to have real darkness at night. It's really important. Darkness is another nutrient that most of us are not getting. Too many people sleep with the TV on, or the clock radio is on there, or some sort of light, the night light. You want to make sure that you're sleeping in a darkened room at night. This really, really is very important for your overall health. Our hormone levels have a rhythm to them, and if you disturb that rhythm, it will definitely cause a problem. As an emergency doctor, I've done my share of night shifts. Now, I haven't done a night shift now in about 8 years, and I can tell you my health now is so much better that I stopped doing those things. Every time I used to work a night shift, I would be sick, literally sick for 3 days. I would be tired, I'd have diarrhea, my stomach would hurt, and for years I couldn't understand what was causing it. Now I do understand it was causing hormonal imbalances because of working a night shift. So that's one of the reasons I've gotten out of working night shifts, because I just won't do it. I'd rather quit. But if you've ever, and you know, when you're young, if you're 20 years old and you pull an all-nighter, you may feel sort of cruddy the next day. But as we get older, you can tolerate these things less and less because you just don't have the reserves to be able to do that. So you want to make sure that you have your hormone levels checked, that all of them, whenever I see a patient, no matter what they come in for, I want to see what do their hormone levels look like. Why? Because it tells me where they are on that spectrum. Are they okay? Are these things balanced, or are they having high cortisol with low sex hormones, or is everything depleted? Because it's going to really change my overall treatment. But it also gives me an idea of the big picture. If their cortisol levels are really high and all their other sex hormones are low, I know this patient's under stress, whatever it may be. And then the goal becomes, okay, let me find the stress. Because if I can't find the stress, then I can't help that patient as much as I want to help them. Now, and sometimes it's not easy to find what that source is. That stress may be something in their environment. It may be something that they're eating. But it could also be just some sort of emotional situation that can cause this stress too. And those are difficult. But it's important. So you want to identify and reduce excessive stress. Very, very important. Any questions at this point?
What kind of prescription do you give for somebody who has hormone imbalance? Okay, let's say they come in, they're stressed.
When you say prescription, do you mean a medication?
Yeah, I mean, do you give medications for hormone imbalance? Or do you just talk to the patient?
Okay, well, that's a good question. So what do I do when I have a patient? First of all, the number one thing I want to do with the patient is I want to find out what do they do for a living? Are they getting enough sleep? Are there environmental problems? Are they being exposed to mold, for example? Have they had any tick bites? What are they eating? This is super important. I want to make sure that their diet is healthy. So the number one thing is you want to start off with the internal and the external environment. Are there stressors in that? Because that's the number one thing. Because if the patient's eating lousy food, getting lousy sleep, being exposed to mold, full of Lyme disease or something else like that, and if we don't address those things, everything else is just a waste of time. It really is. Unfortunately, you go to the doctor, and they ignore all of those things. And they go right to giving you a drug to treat all of your symptoms, which if you really think about it from a rational sense, it doesn't make any sense at all. Now, that's not to say that treating symptoms isn't useful, and if you have a really terrible symptom, if you're in pain, for example, a pain medication can be very helpful. If your blood sugars are tremendously out of control, you may need a medication temporarily to help reduce that. But I look at drugs as more like crutches. If you break your leg, okay, well, I'm not going to just tell you to go walk. We're going to put it in a cast, and you use a crutch, right? But once your leg heals, you want to throw those crutches away. You don't want to have those crutches the rest of your life. If you have a chronic problem, you may need a crutch for a while, meaning a drug, but eventually you want to be able to get rid of that drug, get rid of those crutches, and walk normally again, so to speak. So the number one thing is the diet and lifestyle and all these other influences. Number two, I'm going to check your metabolism. I want to see, do you have imbalances in your metabolism? Whether you're overly alkaline or overly acidic, overly anabolic or catabolic. There's all these different imbalances that I'm looking at. In other words, I want to make sure that you're at the proper point on that U-shaped curve so that you have balance there metabolically. Number three, I will prescribe bioidentical hormones to help replace those in people that really need them. In other words, if they're in the general adaptation stress syndrome phase 3, where everything's depleted, these people really need hormones. You need to feed their adrenal glands, so to speak, and feed their sex hormones so that they can function normally. And lastly, I will prescribe medications to treat symptoms if these symptoms are real bad, or sometimes people need certain drugs to help them with, for example, infectious diseases, fungal infections. These things are, thyroid imbalances. So the medications come into play, but it's really not the first line. It's the fourth line. Okay, so just to be a little bit more specific about the diet, so you want to eat every meal that you eat, you want to make sure that you're getting enough saturated fat and cholesterol in each meal. Now, I know that sounds exactly the opposite of what you've heard. We've heard that saturated fats are poisonous. We've heard that dietary cholesterol is poisonous. But really, these things are the backbone of what we're made out of and what's helping to keep your hormones balanced. Think about breast milk. Can you think of a better food for a baby than breast milk? Well, of course not, right? I mean, breast milk is the perfect food for a baby. So what is breast milk made out of? What's in there? Well, believe it or not, it's high in cholesterol and high in saturated fat, of course. And a growing baby needs these things, but we may say, well, babies need this, but adults don't need it. And the vegans out there will say, oh, yeah, we may need it as babies, but at a certain point, we don't need those things anymore. Really? So at what point do we stop growing? Is it at 2 years old or 3 years old or 5 years old? Or no, of course, we're still growing. Do we still need these nutrients at that time? Absolutely. Even when we're full-grown adults, we're still rebuilding and repairing all the time. We need these things. And if you don't eat these things, if you don't eat cholesterol, and if you don't eat saturated fat, your body will make these things because that's how vital they are. Your body will produce them. It's going to be taxing on your body. It'll take a lot of metabolic energy. It'll be at a high cost, but your body will make them. We make these things because we need them. They are vital to our health. So you'll do yourself a favor. It'll put less stress on your body if you consume these at every meal. So every meal should have a small portion of either meat, fish, poultry, eggs, or cheese. And the more healthy the animal source of this, the better off you are. In other words, you don't want to be eating a cow that has been poisoned by antibiotics and growth hormones and eating, soybeans, as opposed to a grass-fed beef, which is really the natural diet for a cow. And you may ask, well, the cow was fed by milk as a baby. Now it only lives on grass. How is that different from a human? And the answer is, well, it is much different. The cow's liver is much different than ours. They are vegetarians. We're not necessarily vegetarians or vegans by nature. So there are certain animals that will start being breastfed with milk, and later on, horses are another animal. They eat hay, right? They don't eat meat at all. If you feed meat to a horse, you'll kill it. Now, then again, if you feed a human being just hay, the human being will die because we have totally different metabolic requirements. So you want to make sure you're getting plenty of these vital nutrients in your diet at every meal. You want to limit your intake of sugar Sugar should be for a special occasion. It shouldn't be for your unbirthday, so to speak. It should be maybe for your birthday and a holiday and Thanksgiving or whatever. That's when I consume it. You want to avoid juice and other sweetened beverages. Juice is very overrated. There's people out there who want to sell you orange juice. Oh, but we need vitamin C. And you get that from orange juice. You also get plenty of sugar from juice. Juice is very overrated. Spring water should be your main drink. This is a drink that we should be drinking for basically everything. It should be our main drink. Now, I have people tell me, oh, but Doc, water tastes so bad. It's so boring. Can I put something in it? If you have that response, if water tastes bad for you, either you need to find another source of water, okay, or you need to stop drinking all the sweet stuff, which is making the water taste lousy, because that'll ruin your palate. You'll start to think that water tastes sour, because if you consume things that are sweet all the time, water will actually taste sour. You want to avoid consuming these vegetable oils, as I mentioned before, and these things are found in salad dressings and mayonnaise and margarines and food cooked in these oils. If you go to the supermarket and you take a box off a shelf, almost guaranteed that you'll find vegetable oils, either soy oil or canola, in just about every single product that comes in a box. Now, if you went in a time machine and went back in time, 70 years ago, everything that was on the shelf was made with butter or coconut oil or palm oil. All of these things contain high levels of cholesterol and high levels of saturated fat. But you don't find these in products anymore because they're relatively expensive. And what the food companies did, they replaced all these items about 50 or 60 years ago, because when you replace butter with margarine, you cut the cost of the product. The cost of making the product, okay, and you increase your profit margin. Now you're making more money. And basically, if you look at historically, when the health of Western civilization started really, really going down the tubes, is about 50 or 60 years ago when this occurred. So these people that are telling us, oh, we just need to keep avoiding fat in our diets and get rid of the butter and get rid of the saturated fat, well, they're not looking at history. They're looking at pseudoscience, which really, if you look at it, doesn't make sense. As I mentioned before, fried foods are poisonous. You want to avoid processed and nature foods. You want to reduce your stress overall, and you want to sleep at least 7 hours every night, if possible. So what about supplements? Should I use nutritional supplements, Doc? And I'd say be really careful. We're getting ripped off in many, many ways. The food companies are ripping us off because they're trying to tell us that margarine is good or low fat is good, and Splenda is better than sugar and equal. So the food companies are clearly trying to rip us off. Then we're getting ripped off by the pharmaceutical companies that are basically creating a whole culture of people that think it's normal to take a drug for every little ache and pain and every little dysfunction. It's not normal to do this. And also the drug companies are teaching our doctors to actually prescribe drugs for every little thing. My curriculum in medical school, a lot of it was actually formed by the drug companies. They're teaching us what they want us to know. But there's a third group out there ripping us off, and that's the supplement companies, and they're just as bad as everybody else. You may think they're the good guys to the rescue. No, they're not. Every day there's hundreds of new rip-offs out there, magical miracle cures that are going to, get rid of your belly and make you lose weight and grow your hair back, and it's good for your nails and good for this and good for your brain, blah, 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 blah. You hear this stuff all the time. Most of the stuff is snake oil, and it doesn't work. Let me just talk about snake oil for a minute. We've all heard of the term snake oil, right? What is snake oil? Does snake oil have a bad reputation? Of course it does. It is the definition of something that has a bad reputation. Did someone just make this up, that snake oil has a bad reputation? The answer is no. There's a history behind this. Snake oil was used hundreds of years ago, up until about 100 years ago, as something that was good for everything. And it was supposedly it was good for your heart and good for your brain and good for your skin and good for allergies, good for inflammation. And it got a bad reputation because it turned out to be a ripoff. It turned out to be a scam. And so now we hear phrases like, oh, this is just more snake oil. Or here comes the snake oil salesman. Well, let me tell you, snake oil lives and breathes today. Now, what is snake oil? It's oil from a snake, right? It is oil from a snake, just like olive oil is oil from an olive, right? So snake oil is oil from a snake. What is the active ingredient in snake oil? The two major active ingredients of snake oil are eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, DHA and EPA, also known as omega-3 fatty acids. Have you guys heard of omega-3 fatty acids? You can't go anywhere without hearing how wonderful omega-3 fatty acids are. That's also called fish oil. Fish oil and snake oil are the exact same product. There is absolutely no difference, and I would bet that either someone in this room or multiple people or people that you know are consuming fish oil because they've been recommended to take this. Has anybody seen the Loveza commercial on TV? You have. Loveza is prescription fish oil. Did you see all the warnings they give you on this? It can raise your LDL, it can raise your cholesterol. Why? Because it causes stress on your body. Tell your doctor if you drink alcohol. Why? Because it can destroy your liver. Tell your doctor if you have a thyroid problem because it hurts your thyroid. Tell your doctor if you have diabetes because it hurts your pancreas. These are real warnings. Because they call it a drug, by law they have to tell you all the bad things it can cause. The list goes on. And I'm not going to spend the whole night on snake oil or fish oil, but I'm telling you, there's so much stuff out there that it's worse than nothing. Be really, really careful about supplements. Now, that being said, they can be extremely useful, okay? But you better know what you're doing with them because they all have metabolic effects. And if you don't know what you're doing with supplements, you're better off not taking them. So you should use supplements under the care of someone, whether it's a nutritionist or a medical doctor, someone who's able to monitor the response to these supplements. Because if you don't know what you're doing with them, you could get in trouble. Yes, sir?
Doesn't the omega, like in sardines, herring, tuna, so doesn't it lower your cholesterol?
No.
Isn't that the purpose?
No. In fact, Loveza is indicated for one thing by the Food and Drug Administration. If I write a prescription for Loveza, it's FDA approved for one thing and one thing only, and that's to lower triglycerides. And how does it do that? Triglycerides are made in your liver from carbohydrates and sugars, and it poisons your liver so you don't make the triglycerides. Well, yahoo, that's wonderful. Let's just poison our livers. Our triglycerides will come down and we'll be healthier. Are you kidding? No. The omega-3 fatty acids actually can raise your cholesterol. That's, if you watch the commercial, that's the first warning they have. They do not lower cholesterol levels. They may, in some people, they may actually poison your liver to the point where your liver doesn't make the cholesterol, and then I guess your cholesterol drops. Still not a good reason to take it.
So why do doctors and magazines and TV all over the place say, eat fish?
Whatever they tell you to do, if you do the exact opposite, you're probably in good shape. This is because it's all based on medical science, not true science. Hard science will tell us that these omega-3 fatty acids are highly unsaturated. They're prone to oxidative stress. They're very fragile. I mean, you open up any biochemistry book and you'll see, oh my God, these things are very fragile. And so they cause oxidative stress. Yet there's people out there telling you, oh yes, fish oils have antioxidant properties. Really? I don't know what your definition of antioxidant is, but they waste your antioxidants. They're pro-oxidants. They fry things up. They burn things. They do have anti-inflammatory properties, don't get me wrong, but they're not worth the price of having all these other effects. So if you do want to take supplements, you want to be monitored. You want to make sure that whoever is administering these things can tell you that you've had too much or too little or just enough. You want to get to that point on the U-shaped curve where Goldilocks says your soup is just right. So your doctor should be able to monitor your mineral balance, hormone imbalances, acid-base imbalances, antioxidant-oxidant balance, autonomic nervous system balance, immune system balance. All of these things are really, really important to your health. And if you're just shotgun taking this, oh, look, it's good for my hair and it's good for my nails, and the same thing that's in the nail stuff is in the hair stuff, and you start taking all these pills that's good for this part and that part, and you end up taking a bunch of junk. Those are the same stuff, by the way, that they put in Frosted Flakes, that's fortified with vitamins, really junky vitamins. Most of the vitamins that you buy in the health food store, unfortunately, are total garbage. But there may be high levels of garbage, so you think that, oh, look, I'm getting all this good, wonderful garbage in here. It really is. But I do recommend supplements. I do have specific recommendations for my patients, but they're very, very specific, and they're only to be used for very specific purposes. What about hormone replacement therapy? I touched on this before. You want to replace deficiencies in hormones after you rebalance them. The hormones must be bioidentical. You know, for years, they used to give women something called Premarin. Does anybody know what Premarin stands for?
Is it horse urine?
Pregnant mare urine, yeah. So now Premarin is totally natural. It's 100% natural if you're a horse, okay? Now they won't say it's horse estrogen. They'll say, oh, it's equine estrogen. Why do they use the term equine estrogen? Because it's confusing. But no, so Premarin was used for decades, and that was considered hormone replacement therapy. And then after giving this drug to millions of women for 20-plus years, they decided to actually look and see if it worked. And when they looked retrospectively, in other words, they looked back and said, oh my God, this stuff doesn't work. In fact, it's actually, not only does it not help anything, it actually causes cancer, causes degenerative diseases, causes heart disease, causes this, causes that, causes everything. Oh my God, we better not use this anymore. So now they are saying, don't use hormone replacement therapy because it's dangerous. Well, you shouldn't use horse piss. It is dangerous. And you shouldn't use synthetic hormones. They are dangerous. But that doesn't mean bioidentical hormones used under the care of someone who's intelligent and knows what they're doing is dangerous. Whatever they tell you to do, if you do the exact opposite, you're probably in good shape. So 20 years ago when they were telling you to take Premarin, of course you shouldn't take it, right? Now when they tell you don't do hormone replacement therapy, you have to think twice. Well, they're talking about Premarin. Yeah, you shouldn't use that stuff. And these other so-called progestins and other synthetic hormones. These things are terrible for us. They're not genuine parts. Why would you want to use fake parts? Now, why did they use the fake parts in the first place? Why didn't they just use real, absolutely pure, bioidentical hormones? Why? Because they're not patented, and they can't make money off of them. And that may sound sort of cynical, but it's the absolute truth. Every drug that you see that's a prescription drug, it comes from some sort of natural source that they change a little bit. And because they changed it, they can patent it. And because they patent it, they can make money off of it. And because they make money off of it, they want to sell it. And because they want to sell it, they prescribe it. And there you go. This is the state, unfortunately, of medicine to a certain degree. It's very much driven by those sort of forces, unfortunately. So when I do give hormone replacement therapy, I want to monitor the overall metabolic effect of this. Because not only are you replacing these things, but these things have profound effects on your nervous system, on your immune system, on other systems. So I don't want to give these things in a vacuum because it's not in a vacuum. These things have very, very powerful effects. So hormone replacement therapy, and in addition, at the same time, you want to do everything else. You want to balance out the metabolism. You want to reduce the stress. But if you give just replace hormones by itself without addressing the problems that cause the hormonal imbalance in the first place, you're not going to get as good a results as if you did the whole package. Okay, so that leads us to the end of the presentation. And again, thank you for coming tonight.